Welcome to the empty boat. You've arrived. Perhaps by intention or by accident. Perhaps your heart is restless or quietly aching for something you cannot name. Maybe you came seeking answers. Maybe you came simply to breathe. Here, you are invited to let go. Let go of the day's noise, of the pressure to be someone. Let go of the stories others have told you about who you must become. This is a space between two breaths, a shore between waking and dreaming, a temple without walls where only your listening is needed. In these next hours, I will tell you 25 Zen stories, each a lantern, dim but steady, to guide your way through fog, sorrow, longing, and joy. They are not stories to entertain. They are stories to enter. Stories of rivers that do not rush, of broken bowls that shine in moonlight, of silence that speaks. Each one will meet you where you are, and perhaps, gently, nudge you closer to where you long to be. There is no right way to listen. You may close your eyes, lie down, sip warm tea. Let the words drift in and out like wind through pine trees. Remember, the boat is empty, and because it is empty, it cannot sink. Now, if you're ready, come sit beside me. Let me tell you a story. Story 1. The river does not rush. A river winds through the valley like a quiet thought. It does not ask where it is going. It simply moves. And in its movement, it teaches. The opening. The urgency that led him here. He arrived at dusk. Dust on his robe, sweat behind his neck, breath short and tight like a rope pulled too far. His name was Tetsu, and his question was simple. How do I find peace? He asked it before his feet had stopped moving, before his thoughts had caught up with his body. He carried books, plans, a journal full of quotes and timelines, all worn from use. The monk did not answer. He only gestured to the stone beside the river and said, "Sit." So Tetsu sat. The river beside them curled gently through the valley, darkening in the fading light. It did not crash. It did not fight. It only flowed. Tetsu crossed his arms, exhaled sharply and said, "I need to know what to do next. I've tried everything. I meditate, I fast, I journal. And still it's like I'm swimming upstream." The monk smiled, eyes soft. "Perhaps," he said, "you are not meant to swim." The Zen parable. The river that changed nothing at night. The stars spread across the sky like quiet intentions. Tetsu sat with the monk beside the fire. The flames crackled gently. The monk spoke. There once was a young monk who could not sleep. He asked his master, "Why can't I calm my mind?" The master led him to a river and said, "Try to stop it." The boy laughed. "I can't stop a river." "Then try to push it," the master said. "That's ridiculous." The master pointed at the water again. "You see, the river does not care what you want. It flows as it flows. Peace is not stopping the current. It is learning how to float." Tetsu lowered his eyes. "I've spent years building rafts, tools, routines, answers. But I still feel like I'm drowning." The monk poured him tea. "Perhaps the river is not drowning you," he said. "Perhaps you are just not letting go." Through philosophical reflection. Peace is not control. In Zen, peace is not the reward for effort. It is the absence of striving. The river does not hurry. It does not ask for permission to curve or pause. It yields, and, In yielding, it endures. Control is the illusion that we are the masters of flow, but the deeper teaching is this: you are the water. You are not separate from the movement. You are not meant to command the wind or the bend of time. You are meant to feel your way, gently, honestly, through what is. When we release the need to rush, we make space for the river to carry us. When we stop fighting its shape, we find it has already made room for us. Psychological insight: anxiety, surrender, and nervous system. Wisdom, what Tetsu was experiencing, that constant internal agitation, is what modern psychology calls hypervigilance. The nervous system locked in survival mode. The mind convinced that only action, only solving, only doing will bring rest. But the truth is more tender. Safety begins in surrender, not to danger, but to reality. Therapists now speak of the window of tolerance, the emotional range where we feel safe, seen, steady. To live outside it, always reaching, gripping, gasping, is to exhaust the body's wisdom. Tetsu's attempts at mastery, his fasting, his striving, were not wrong. They were just loud. And the river was whispering a quieter truth. Meditative closing. Letting the water carry you the next morning, Tetsu woke before dawn. He walked again to the riverbank, bare feet sinking slightly into the soil. He sat on the stone, the same one, but this time he did not ask a question. He did not check the time. He did not make a plan. He simply watched the water. It moved as before. It didn't answer. But somehow he understood. He breathed, closed his eyes, felt the current within him. It did not rush, and neither did he. Dear listener, what current in your life are you trying to outrun? What part of your heart is still fighting the bend in the river? Let this moment be a pause. Let the water pass. You don't have to swim harder. You don't have to know the way. You only need to remember, you are the river, and the river does not rush. As the Buddha said, be like water, soft enough to yield, strong enough to wear away stone. Tonight, lie still, breathe as if the stream moves through you, and trust, not the plan, but the flow. Story 2. The sound of falling leaves. Imagine a slow wind through tall cedars, golden leaves spiraling in silence. Somewhere, a wooden chime sighs in the dusk. The opening, whispers of the changing wind. The air had turned cool, not cold yet, but touched by that invisible current that tells even the trees, prepare. The sun no longer burned as long. Shadows arrived sooner. The birds grew quieter. It was early autumn when Tetsu noticed the leaves. He had sat beside the river for weeks watching it flow. Some days his thoughts ran wild. Others, they curled up and fell asleep beside him. The monk offered no teachings, only stillness. Then one morning, something shifted. As he walked through the forest path, the leaves began to fall. Not in gusts, not in showers, but one at a time. He paused, held his breath, and watched. A single golden leaf twirled down like a slow whisper. It did not rush. It did not fight. It surrendered fully to the unseen wind. And in that moment, he felt a sudden ache in his chest, the kind that comes not from sadness, but from beauty too profound to explain. He stayed there until the last leaf had touched the earth, and then he whispered, "What else have I been missing?" 2. The Zen parable, the falling leaf. Has no master. That evening, Tetsu asked the monk a question he had long avoided. Why do I feel anxious even when there is nothing wrong? The monk looked up from tending the fire. Because the leaves are falling. Tetsu frowned. I don't understand. The monk sat back, closed his eyes, and told him this. In the northern hills, there lived a boy who hated autumn. Each year, as the days grew short and the trees turned gold, he became restless. His chest tightened, he could not sleep. He worried constantly, though he could not say why. One year, he climbed the highest tree and shouted at the wind, "Why do you make everything die?" An old master heard him and answered, "Because even trees must learn to let go." But it makes me feel afraid, the boy said. The master smiled. Then it is not the season that frightens you, it is change. Tetsu lowered his gaze. I think I am like that boy. The monk nodded. Most of us are. Then he added, but notice, the leaf falls silently. It does not scream. Philosophical reflection. On impermanence and gentle surrender, impermanence is not a punishment. It is the rhythm of reality. Mountains crumble, rivers shift course, the moon waxes and wanes, and within us too, joy rises and fades. Sorrow lifts, returns, softens, and passes again. The leaf does not resist the season. It does not fight to stay on the branch. It lets go when it is time. We, on the other hand, hold. We grip our identities, our routines, our relationships, even our pain, as if they define us. But the teachings of Zen remind us, clinging is the root of suffering. To suffer less is not to avoid change, but to soften into it, to listen, as the leaf does, for the moment the wind says, now, and to trust, even as we fall, that the ground is not the end, only another beginning. Psychological analysis. Facing anxiety. Through present moment awareness in the modern world, anxiety often comes not from what is, but from what might be. It is born from the tension between our desire for control and the reality of constant change. Autumn, for many people, triggers a subtle unease. The dying of summer, the encroaching stillness of winter, the reminder that nothing lasts forever. But instead of resisting that discomfort, what happens when we greet it, as the monk did? Modern therapeutic practices now echo what Zen has known for centuries. Anxiety softens when we attend to the body. Fear dissolves when we witness it without judgment. And the present moment, even when tinged with sorrow, is never unlivable. Tetsu began to understand this as he walked slower, sat longer, listened more deeply to the trees. He realized the leaf falls not because it fails, but because the tree trusts it is time. In our own lives, what are we still gripping, even as the wind calls us to release? Meditative closing, the invitation of the falling leaf. That night, Tetsu sat beneath a tall ginkgo tree. He closed his eyes and heard them, the leaves falling one by one, not a sound of grief, but of grace. He did not try to capture the moment. He did not analyze. He did not think. He just listened. And in the listening, he felt something loosen inside, a knot that had been there for years, unraveling, quietly, gently. Now, dear listener, wherever you are, in your room, on a quiet walk, lying in bed with your thoughts still swirling, pause for just a moment. Can you hear the leaves? Even if it is not autumn where you are, some part of your life is in its season of change. A relationship shifting, a version of yourself fading, a dream letting go of your grip. Breathe in, breathe out. You don't need to fix it. You don't need to name it. You only need to witness it. As the Buddha once said, all compounded things are subject to vanish. Strive on with mindfulness. Let that thought settle like a leaf in your mind tonight. And if you find a gentle sadness rising, welcome it. It is the sound of falling leaves, and it is nothing to fear. Story 3. The Bowl with a Crack. A distant bell echoes across foggy hills, slow footsteps on wooden floors. A kettle whistles softly. 1. The opening, what we try to hide rain, had arrived in the valley. Soft and slow, the kind that lingers, without urgency. The monk's hut smelled of cedarwood and wet earth. A fire crackled in the hearth, sending light across the bamboo floor. Tetsu sat near the warmth, his legs tucked beneath him, eyes watching the steam rise from a bowl of tea. The bowl was old, clearly handmade, its glaze worn by time. A visible crack curved along its side like a thin river, not repaired, not hidden. Tetsu leaned forward. Why do you still use this? Doesn't it leak? The monk smiled without looking up. No, it holds enough. He placed the bowl gently between them. There is beauty, he said, not despite the crack, but because of it. Tetsu blinked. But it's damaged. The monk raised an eyebrow. So are you. 2. The Zen Parable, the Bowl. That sang that evening, after the fire dimmed and the rain became a whisper. The monk told him a story. Once there was a temple in the mountains, known for its perfect silence. Within it lived a master potter who crafted tea bowls said to be flawless. One day, a novice accidentally dropped a bowl, and it cracked. In fear, the boy tried to hide the flaw with paint and dust, but the master found it and, to the novice's surprise, smiled. He took gold dust and lacquer and slowly filled the crack with light. Now, he said, the bowl sings, not because it was never broken, but because it has lived. From then on, the temple used only bowls with cracks, not to glorify damage, but to honor truth. Tetsu was quiet for a long time. Then he whispered, I've spent so much time hiding my cracks. The monk gently placed the bowl into his hands. Then perhaps, he said, you are finally ready to begin. Philosophical reflection. The beauty of what has endured in the West, we are taught to polish away flaws, to strive for smoothness, perfection, symmetry. But in Zen, and especially in the Japanese art of kintsugi, it is the crack that becomes the canvas. When something breaks and is mended with gold, it becomes more valuable, not less. Why? Because it now carries a story, a witnessing, a quiet endurance. So too with the human soul. The hurts we carry, the losses, betrayals, humiliations, they leave marks. But those marks do not need to be erased. They are not shameful. They are not failures. They are evidence that we have lived and healed. The goal is not to be untouched. The goal is to be transformed, visibly, vulnerably, and still whole. Psychological analysis. Shame, trauma, and radical self-acceptance. Modern psychology names this trauma-informed wholeness. The understanding that healing does not mean going back to how we were, but learning to integrate what has happened. Tetsu, like many of us, carried wounds. He had tried to hide them behind ambition, knowledge, control. He feared being seen. This fear is universal. We hide our emotional cracks, the anxiety, the grief, the moments of collapse, under smiles and social armor. But what if, instead of hiding, we honored them? What if we said, "Here is where I broke, and here is where I rebuilt," with softness and light and care? Self-worth grows not from perfection, but from truth. Therapists now encourage self-compassion as a core healing tool, to speak to ourselves as we would a beloved friend, to hold our pain tenderly, to allow room for imperfection without shame. The monk understood this long before science caught up. He used the cracked bowl not because it was good enough, but because it told the truth. Meditative closing, the light in the break that night, as the fire dimmed into embers, Tetsu held the cracked bowl in both hands. He turned it slowly, feeling the groove of the floor. It had once been a break. Now it was a golden vein. His eyes welled with quiet tears. For the first time in years, he did not push them down. He did not feel weak. He did not feel ashamed. He felt alive. Dear listener, what cracks have you tried to hide? What parts of you feel too damaged to be seen? Close your eyes for a moment and bring to mind a time when you were broken, not to reopen the wound, but to trace it with gold. You are not meant to be perfect. You are meant to be real. As the Buddha said, with our thoughts, we make the world. Speak or act with a pure mind, and happiness will follow you like your shadow. Let this truth follow you tonight. Sleep not in pursuit of flawlessness, but in the quiet joy of knowing you have broken, you have healed, and you still hold enough, just like the bowl, just like the story, just like the heart that beats, even now beneath your ribs. It is enough. Story 4, the empty teacup, the soft clink of ceramics and rain tapping on old temple shingles, a deep breath in candlelight. 1. The opening, the seeker and his questions. The autumn rain had passed. The garden outside the temple shimmered under soft mist, each blade of grass sparkling like it held a secret. Inside, the air was warm with the scent of tea, roasted barley and wild ginger. Tetsu sat opposite the monk, eyes eager, spine straight. He had been thinking for days. A question had taken hold of him, and he could no longer keep it quiet. "Master," he began, "I've read so many sutras. I've studied the Four Noble Truths. I've practiced the Eightfold Path, but I still feel lost. What am I missing?" The monk smiled, then reached for the kettle. He picked up Tetsu's cup, already full, and began to pour. The tea rose slowly, then met the rim, then spilled over, trickling onto the table, onto the mat, onto Tetsu's folded robes. "Stop!" Tetsu cried. "The cup is full." The monk set the kettle down, eyes twinkling. "Exactly," and said no more. The Zen parable. Too full to receive. That night, as the rain began again in gentle waves, the monk spoke. Long ago, a renowned professor traveled across the sea to meet a Zen master. "Teach me about Zen," he demanded. "I've studied philosophy, logic, religion. I've read every sacred text." The master said nothing. He only poured tea. When the cup overflowed, the professor jumped up. "What are you doing? Are you mad?" The master replied calmly, "You are like this cup, full of your own opinions. How can I show you Zen unless you first empty yourself?" Tetsu looked down, ashamed. "I thought knowing more would make me wiser." The monk handed him a fresh cup, this one empty. "Wisdom," he said gently, "is not how much you hold, but how open you are to what comes." Philosophical reflection. Releasing the mind. that knows in Zen the beginner is praised more than the scholar, not because knowledge is unworthy, but because certainty is a trap. To believe I already know is to shut the door before the wind arrives. Zen does not enter through study, but through silence, through observation, through the readiness to be changed. The teacup that is already full cannot be filled again. The heart that is already decided cannot feel. The mind that is already certain cannot awaken. Tetsu had filled himself with teachings, rules, words. But he had not left space for wonder. He had not allowed the world to surprise him. The monk's spilled tea was not a mistake. It was an invitation. Psychological analysis. The ego's need to know, and the soul's need to listen. In the modern world, we are addicted to knowing. We Google, scroll, research, read reviews, check every source. We fill our heads with more and more, not to feel wise, but to feel safe. This is the ego's armor, the belief that if we can just understand everything, we won't have to feel uncertain, or vulnerable, or lost. But healing, real healing, comes not from more information, but from presence. The capacity to sit with what we do not know, without panic. To hold a question without rushing to answer it. To say, I don't know, and remain soft. Therapists often note that true breakthroughs happen after the client stops trying to figure it all out and begins to listen instead to their own body, to the moment, to the silence beneath the words. Tetsu's lesson was not about tea. It was about learning to empty himself of conclusions so he could receive what he could not predict. Meditative closing. Your cup, your teacup. Breath later that night, Tetsu poured his own tea. Slowly, mindfully, he drank in silence. The taste was not extraordinary, but something in it felt whole, like a new beginning. He did not try to name it. He did not try to explain it. He simply allowed the warmth to fill him. Not too much, just enough. Dear listener, how full is your cup? Full of old stories you've been told about who you are. Full of judgments, plans, fears. Do you listen? Not just to others, but to life. Or do you only wait to respond? Take a breath with me. Inhale slowly. Exhale gently. Place your attention on the space between thoughts. That emptiness, that pause, is the doorway. As the Buddha said, in the end, only three things matter: how well you lived, how well you loved, and how well you let go. Let go, for a moment, of needing to know. Let go of control, of self-definition, of the performance. Empty your cup, and into that stillness. Something deeper may pour. Maybe peace. Maybe truth. Maybe the sound of your own soul, at last, being heard. Story 5. The Temple Without Walls. Early morning mist. Birdsong woven with temple bells. Footsteps across dew-covered grass. The opening, when the sacred becomes distant. Tetsu had grown up revering temples. Their high gates, their incense thick. Halls, the slow chants echoing through stone corridors. All of it had felt holy, untouchable, distant. He remembered walking behind his mother as a boy, whispering prayers with small, shy lips, believing the gods could only hear him if he knelt just right, bowed just low, behaved just so. Years later, here he was again, not in a temple of grandeur, but in a moss-covered hut beside a river, with a quiet old monk who rarely spoke and never taught in the way Tetsu had imagined. And yet, something had begun to shift. One afternoon, while sweeping fallen leaves from the garden path, Tetsu looked up and froze. A spider's web stretched between two bamboo stalks, glistening with light rain. In its center, silence, geometry, stillness. He stared at it for several minutes, then whispered, "Why does this feel more sacred than the altar?" The monk, who had been watching from under the eaves, nodded gently. "Because the web," he said, "never tried to become a temple. It simply is." 2. The Zen parable, the temple that cannot be entered. That evening, over tea, the monk told a story. There once was a monk who searched for a perfect temple, a place where no pain could reach him, where only peace and divinity existed. He traveled for years, crossing deserts and mountains, studying under dozens of masters. Finally, he found an ancient, hidden monastery at the edge of the world. The gates were golden. The air shimmered. It was everything he had dreamed. But when he tried to enter, an old monk stopped him and said, "You cannot go in while you are seeking." "Why not?" the traveler cried. The monk replied, "Because your idea of sacredness blinds you to what is already sacred. You think divinity exists only beyond this gate, but the divine is in your hunger, your breath, your doubt." The traveler fell to his knees and wept, and in that weeping, the gates dissolved. Tetsu sipped his tea in silence, letting the story settle in his chest like warm coals. "I always thought I had to leave the world behind to find peace," he said. The monk looked at him with kind eyes. "Peace was never elsewhere," he said. "Only your mind was free." Philosophical reflection, sacredness beyond separation. In Zen, there is no distinction between the sacred and the mundane. There are no holy places and ordinary places. There is only this moment, and your relationship to it. When we divide the world, this is spiritual, this is not, this is pure, this is profane, we miss the very teaching the Buddha embodied. The path is not outside of life. It is life. Washing, dishes, walking through noise, watching clouds move, all are temples if we are fully present. The sacred is not behind gold gates or Sanskrit scrolls. It is in the hand that prepares food with love, the sigh that follows a long day, the small act of pausing to feel the wind on your face. Tetsu had begun to feel it, subtly, not through theory, but through the gentle unraveling of his resistance. He no longer needed to chase a moment of awakening. He began to see that awakening chases us in every moment we stop running. Psychological analysis, integration over escapism. In the language of modern psychology, what Tetsu was learning was integration, the opposite of dissociation. Many seekers, burned by suffering, turn to spirituality as an escape. We think, if I can just meditate hard enough, purify long enough, transcend high enough, I won't have to feel pain. But that path becomes another form of avoidance. The Zen path, like trauma-informed healing, invites something deeper. Wholeness, without separation presence, without idealization, acceptance without detachment. True healing is not about building walls around what we call spiritual and shutting out the rest. It's about letting the sacred spill into the cracks of everyday life. Tetsu had thought he needed a temple. What he found was a garden, a spider's web, a cup of tea, and in these, he found more God than in all the golden altars of his memory. Meditative closing. Wherever you are home. That night, Tetsu stood barefoot outside the hut. The moon was bright, caught between branches. The air smelled of pine and damp earth. He bowed, not to a statue, not to a shrine, but to the moment. He whispered only 3 words. "This is enough." And in the quiet, something bowed back. Now, dear listener, where do you go to feel close to the divine? A temple, a mountain, a church, or a prayer mat? All are beautiful, but none are required, because the true temple is already here, in the sound of your breath, in the rhythm of your steps, in the stillness that listens when you finally stop speaking. As the Buddha once said, if you cannot find truth where you are now, you will never find it. So tonight, whatever room you are in, whatever state your soul may be in, light a small candle within. Let this be your temple. Let this be your peace. Let this be enough. Story 6. The Silence Between Notes. Night falls on a distant hill. A flute's lingering echo drifts into stillness, and the wind grows quiet to listen. The opening, the music that stayed behind. The day had ended in amber. The forest glowed with a quiet light, and the last birds called one another gently before the dark. Tetsu sat with the monk in the old hut, sipping a bowl of barley tea as the silence thickened around them. From deeper in the valley, a faint sound rose, the delicate floating melody of a bamboo flute. The notes hung in the air like mist. Soft, incomplete, beautiful because they faded. Tetsu closed his eyes. "Who plays that?" he asked. "A blind man," the monk answered. "He lives alone and plays only when the wind listens." Tetsu smiled, faintly. "It sounds like sorrow and peace made a promise together." The monk turned toward him. "Do you hear the silence between the notes?" Tetsu furrowed his brow. "I hear the music," the monk nodded. "And yet, the music rests on silence the way the moon rests on a still lake. Without the silence, there would be no music." Tetsu was quiet, letting that thought move through him, like sound dissolving in air. The Zen parable, the note that was never played. Later that night, as the flute's voice faded into the trees, the monk told a story. In a village by the sea, a master musician was known for his powerful songs. One day, a young apprentice begged to learn. "Teach me your greatest melody," the boy said. The master played a haunting tune, all but one note. Just before the final note, he stopped. "Why didn't you finish it?" the boy asked, confused. The master smiled. "Because the final note is yours to hear in silence." The apprentice frowned. "But it feels incomplete." The master nodded. "Good. Let it remain open. Some truths must echo, not resolve." Tetsu sat back, looking into the fire. "All my life," he said, "I filled every silence with something, music, words, noise. I thought stillness was emptiness." The monk stirred the coals with a long iron stick. "Stillness," he said, "is where the soul returns to listen." 3. Philosophical reflection, hearing what cannot be heard. We live in a world of noise, literal and emotional. Words pile upon words. Notifications blink like fireflies. Even our thoughts are not silent. They chatter, spin, demand, reply. But in Zen, true wisdom often lives between things, in pauses, in absences, in the quiet breath between questions, the silence between notes in a song, the moment before a bough touches string, the space between 2 footsteps on a forest path. These are not gaps, they are gateways. The Japanese concept of ma refers to the space between, not as emptiness, but as presence. It is not what is missing, but what is holding. Just as a cup holds tea only because of its empty space, a life becomes holy, not through endless filling, but by reverent, intentional space. The monk knew this. The blind man playing his flute knew this. And Tetsu, now, was beginning to hear it, not as silence, but as something sacred. Psychological analysis, the anxiety of noise, and the medicine of stillness. In psychological terms, silence often makes us uncomfortable because it removes control. When a room grows quiet, we fear judgment. When the conversation stops, we scramble to fill it. When life slows down, our unprocessed feelings surface, and so we run into distraction, into busy work, into noise. But therapeutic research has shown silence lowers cortisol. Stillness activates the parasympathetic nervous system. Pauses in conversation increase empathy and trust. What modern science is now proving, Zen understood long ago. Healing begins when the noise fades. Tetsu, like many, had feared quiet, equating it with isolation, awkwardness, even failure. But now he was learning. Silence isn't the absence of meaning. It's the container for it. As he listened to the fading flute, he realized the most powerful part of the melody wasn't the note, but the moment after it vanished, where the heart leaned in, expectant, where presence deepened, where nothing was said, and everything was heard. Meditative closing, your silence, your song. That night, long after the fire went out, Tetsu lay awake under the rafters. He listened to the crackling of wood, to the breeze moving through the reeds, to the silence. And for the first time, he didn't fill it. He just let it hold him, as gently as a hand cupping a candle flame. Dear listener, what noise are you living inside? The opinions of others, the demands of your mind, the need to always respond, to always know? Take a breath, and then take one more. Now listen, not for sound, but for space. The pause between your heartbeats, the stillness just after your exhale, the hush in your chest that says, you don't have to chase peace, you already are it. As the Buddha once said, better than 1,000 hollow words is one word that brings peace. Let silence be that word. And tonight, as you lie in your bed, perhaps with the hum of a city or the hush of country wind, let the space between things be your sanctuary, your temple, your song. It is enough. Story 7. A cloud does not hold the sky. Grey sky above a silent hill, the soft rhythm of distant rain, wind slipping through pine needles like breath through grief. The opening. The girl who stopped laughing, she came on a day when the wind spoke little, wrapped in a brown shawl, eyes heavy, hair clinging to her cheeks from the rain. She looked older than her age, not in body, but in the quiet ache behind her gaze. The monk welcomed her without question. He simply poured tea. She took it with both hands and held it for a long time, not drinking. My mother died last month, she said, voice barely above a whisper. I haven't felt anything since. The monk didn't offer condolences. He didn't reach across the table or tell her things would be okay. He only pointed to the open door. Do you see the sky? He asked. She nodded, confused. Good, he said. Now look again. Tell me where the sky ends and the cloud begins. She stared. I can't. He smiled softly. That is grief. The Zen parable. The cloud that believed it was the sky. That evening, after preparing warm rice and miso, the monk told her a story. There was once a small cloud who believed it was the entire sky. It drifted over valleys and mountains, proud and alone. One day, it saw a storm far below and began to weep. The rain fell hard. When the rain stopped, the cloud looked at its reflection in a lake and saw it was smaller now. Terrified, it cried to the wind, "I'm disappearing!" The wind whispered back, "You are not vanishing, you are becoming rain. And when the time is right, you'll rise again." The cloud trembled. "But who will I be then?" The wind answered, "Always yourself, but never the same." The girl held her bowl in her lap, eyes down. "I don't want to be rain," she murmured. "You already are," the monk replied. "And that is not a curse, it is a blessing." Philosophical reflection. You are not the weather in Zen. We are taught not to cling to form, not even to our own emotions. Pain comes, joy comes. Longing, confusion, anger, all rise like clouds in the mind. But clouds do not stay. They pass. They change shape. They dissolve into mist, or become storms, or turn into gentle rain. What remains is not the weather, but the sky that holds it. That is your awareness. That is your true self. When we grieve, we often believe, "This is who I am now, a person in pain, a broken thing." But that is the illusion. Grief is a cloud. You are the sky. And no matter how dark the cloud, it can never stain the vastness behind it. The girl didn't understand this yet, but she listened, and the seed of it found a place inside her, waiting for light. Psychological analysis. Grief, identity, and the practice of witnessing. In psychology, grief is often misunderstood. People try to fix it, to rush through stages, to return to normal. But grief isn't a sickness, it's an adjustment. The body and mind relearning how to live in a world that has changed. One of the great traps of suffering is fusion. When we become so entangled with a feeling, we forget it is not permanent. I am broken. I'm lost. I am this sadness. But healing begins with diffusion, gently noticing, this is sadness, and I am the one observing it. This shift is subtle, but powerful. It creates space. It returns agency. It reminds us we are more than any moment, no matter how heavy. Zen calls this the practice of watching the clouds, not reacting, not pushing away, not clinging, just watching and trusting that the sky never vanishes, even when we cannot see it. Meditative closing. The sky in you. That night the girl stood outside looking up. The clouds were thick, charcoal, trembling. The moon was hidden. She felt a lump in her throat that wouldn't move. But then a wind came, gentle, persistent. And through a tear in the sky, she saw stars. She wept quietly, not from despair, but from the strange tenderness of it. How even after all this time, light could still break through. She didn't say anything. She didn't need to. The monk stepped beside her and said only, "You are not the storm. You are what holds it." Dear listener, what cloud rests over your heart tonight? A memory? A goodbye never said? A name you still whisper in your sleep? Grief is real, but you are more than it. Close your eyes. Picture your pain not as a burden to be removed, but as a cloud, moving, changing, softening. You don't have to chase it away. You only have to remember the sky is still there. As the Buddha once said, just as a mother would protect her only child at the risk of her own life, so should you hold your sorrow with that same boundless love. Hold it, watch it, let it pass, and in the stillness that follows, may you remember, a cloud does not hold the sky, and you are the sky. Story 8. The bamboo learns to bend. A rising wind sighs through a grove of bamboo. The rustling speaks without words. Dusk gathers like breath held before release. The opening, when strength becomes a burden. The storm had been growing. All day, clouds gathered like old grief returning. The sky bruised to a deep violet. The air thickened, not with rain, but with expectation. The kind that made the skin shiver and the trees fall quiet. Tetsu stood at the edge of the forest, jaw clenched, fists tucked into his sleeves. He had argued with another monk, harsh, words spoken, voices raised, the sting of shame still hot on his cheeks. I did nothing wrong, he muttered, but inside, something ached. He heard footsteps behind him. The old monk appeared without sound, looking up at the sky. Storm's coming, the monk said. Tetsu didn't reply. The monk stepped forward and pointed to a cluster of pine trees, tall, rigid, noble. When the wind comes, he said, they stand tall until they break. Then he pointed to the bamboo, green, narrow, bowing with the breeze. But these, he whispered, they survive. Tetsu frowned. Are you saying I should just yield? Let others walk over me? The monk smiled gently. No, I'm saying there is strength in softness and danger in only knowing how to stand. The Zen parable. The bamboo and the oak that evening. The rain arrived. It fell in silver threads, and the wind howled across the roof like an old spirit calling home. Tetsu sat beside the fire, still, smouldering with anger, his shoulders stiff. The monk stirred the flames, then began his story. Long ago, a mighty oak tree stood proud in the center of the forest. Its branches stretched wide. Birds nested in its limbs. Travelers rested beneath its shade. Beside it, barely noticed, grew a slender bamboo shoot. One winter, a great storm came. The winds howled, tearing at the sky. The oak, unwilling to bend, resisted with all its might. But its trunk cracked and fell. The bamboo bent low, flattened by the wind. But when the storm passed, it rose again, unbroken. When asked how it survived, the bamboo replied, I do not fight the wind. I learn its song. Tetsu looked into the fire, his anger cooling, into thought. I thought strength meant not yielding, he said. The monk poured tea into 2 cups. In the body, rigidity is death, he replied. Only what moves, lives. Philosophical reflection, strength. Without rigidity, we are taught to be strong, to hold our ground, to never back down. But Zen teaches something subtler. Real strength is not in resistance, but in resilience. To bend is not to break. To yield is not to surrender your soul. The bamboo does not lose itself when it bows. It survives. It sways. And in doing so, it outlives trees that refuse to move. Many mistake hardness for power, but what is hard cracks. Water wears down stone. Wind smooths mountains. Time humbles everything rigid. In the same way, The heart must learn to bow, not in defeat, but in grace, not to become smaller, but to remain whole. Tetsu, who had tried so hard to be right, began to wonder, what if being kind was stronger than being right? What if yielding was also a form of wisdom? Psychological analysis, flexibility, trauma, and the nervous system in trauma healing, this truth finds its echo. People who endure difficulty, abuse, betrayal, loss, often survive by becoming emotionally rigid, guarded, hypervigilant, tightly held. This rigidity serves them for a time, but healing does not come from building thicker walls. It comes from learning to feel safely again, to soften, to breathe, to move with life instead of against it. The nervous system thrives on flexibility. Resilience, as modern psychologists define it, is not the ability to avoid pain, but the ability to recover, to return, to remain open after impact. Tetsu had spent years clenching his emotions into steel, but now, in the presence of bamboo swaying in stormlight, he saw another path, one that did not require him to fight every wind, but to learn to listen, to learn to lean, to learn to stand again by first bowing. Meditative closing, bend, and return later that night, when the storm had quieted into a hush. Tetsu walked barefoot into the garden. The bamboo swayed above him, not broken, not fearful, not rigid. He touched one stalk gently. It bent under his palm, then rose again. He whispered, "Thank you." He wasn't sure who he was speaking to, the plant, the wind, the world, or perhaps his own heart. But something softened in him, and in that softening he felt strong again, not armored, not defended, just real. Dear listener, where have you grown too rigid? What emotions do you clench into silence? What arguments do you carry like swords? Take a breath. Now take another. Let your shoulders drop. Let your jaw release. Let your spine sway a little. You are not meant to stand like stone. You are meant to move. As the Buddha said, in the end, only the flexible endure. Let that truth ripple through you tonight. Bend, bow, breathe. And when the wind comes, do not fight it. Let it pass through you and rise again, rooted, resilient, and free. Story 9. Sweeping the dust that returns. A wooden broom dragging lightly across stone, the crisp air of early morning. Silence broken only by the hush of leaves being gathered and scattered again. The opening, the path that would not stay clean. Tetsu had taken over the duty of sweeping the temple path. Every morning before dawn, while mist still clung to the grass and birds had yet to sing, he would rise, tie back his robes, and begin. The path wound from the old gate to the monk's hut, a stone trail shaded by maple and pine. Each night, it collected dust, fallen leaves, pollen, the invisible touch of time. Each morning, Tetsu swept. And each morning, by the time the sun was high, the path was dusty again. It frustrated him. He wanted the path to stay clean, a symbol of effort rewarded, of order imposed. One day, exasperated, he said to the monk, "Why sweep every day if it never stays clear?" The old monk looked up from his garden and smiled. "Because the dust is not the problem," he said. "Wanting it to disappear forever, that is." The Zen Parable. The monk and the falling leaves. That evening, Tetsu sat with the monk beneath the maple tree. The wind had grown curious. shaking down leaves like golden confessions. The monk sipped his tea, then began his story. There once was a monk known for his perfect gardens. Every day he swept the courtyard with precision, every stone in place. One autumn, the abbot watched him finish his work, then silently shook a tree, letting leaves fall again across the swept path. The monk gasped. "Why would you ruin it?" The abbot smiled. "I only reminded it how to breathe." The monk looked at the leaves, scattered like blessings, and slowly he began to understand. Tetsu closed his eyes, the lesson drifting through him like the wind through branches. "So the path isn't meant to stay clean?" "No," said the monk. "It is meant to be cared for." Philosophical reflection. Peace through presence, not permanence. Zen does not promise perfection. It does not offer a path that stays swept, a mind that stays quiet, a heart that never breaks. Instead, it teaches presence, attention, the dignity of doing, not to achieve, but to live deeply within the moment itself. To sweep the path each day is not an act of futility, it is a form of prayer. It says, "Even though dust returns, I will meet it with grace. Even though this moment will pass, I will give it everything." We clean not to conquer dust, but to stay in relationship with the ground. We return to the breath, not because we forgot, but because remembering is the practice. The leaf falls. We sweep. The wind comes. We sweep again, and this is not failure. It is life. Psychological analysis, repetition, maintenance, and the myth of arrival in modern life. We are obsessed with completion. We want to finish the task, to be done, to arrive. But the human experience is not linear. It is cyclical. We do not clean once and live in purity. We do not heal once and remain whole. We do not meditate once and live in eternal calm. Growth is not a destination, it is maintenance. The humble, beautiful act of showing up again and again. Psychologists refer to this as ritualized mindfulness, the power of simple, daily practices that ground us. Brushing teeth, walking, journaling, sweeping. These are not trivial. They are how we stay connected to ourselves when everything else becomes dust. Again, Tetsu was beginning to understand this. His broom became less of a tool and more of a companion. Each stroke was not a fight against chaos, but a gesture of love. Meditative closing. The dust is not the enemy. One morning, after weeks of sweeping in silence, Tetsu paused halfway down the path. A breeze scattered fresh leaves across the stone he had just cleared. He watched them fall gently, as if the world were bowing back. Then, without frustration, he raised the broom again and smiled. Dear listener, what dust returns? In your life, old thoughts, wounds you thought were healed, habits that sneak back when you're tired. Let me offer you this. You are not failing. You are living. You don't need to erase the dust forever. You only need to meet it, each time, with presence. Sweep, breathe, begin again. Not because the path will stay clean, but because you are worth walking it, no matter how many leaves fall. As the Buddha said, like a candle in the dark, the practice is not perfect, but persistent. Let that be your strength. And tonight, as you close your eyes, imagine the sweep of a broom in quiet dawn, not trying to win, just moving gently, with care, across the ground of being, again and again. Story 10. No footprints on the water. A still pond at dawn. Dragonflies hover. A pebble falls, plop, and ripples carry a silent lesson across the surface. The opening. The man who needed to matter Tetsu had begun to carve words into stone. Each evening, after his chores were done, he would walk beyond the garden, past the bamboo grove, to a patch of earth near the water. There, he etched short lines into river stones, phrases, names, questions. He did not know why, only that some part of him feared being forgotten. One morning, the monk noticed the growing pile and asked, "Why do you write on stones?" Tetsu hesitated. "To remember what I've learned." The monk picked up one of the stones and held it to the sky. "Do you remember what the river taught you?" Tetsu nodded slowly. "That it flows." "And do you remember what leaves taught you?" "That they fall." The monk placed the stone back down gently. "Then perhaps," he said, "it is time to remember what water teaches. It carries no name and holds no footprints." Part 2. The Zen Parable. The Monk and the Still Pond. That night, beneath a moon so clear it seemed to listen, the monk told him this story. A student once asked his master, "What will remain of me when I'm gone?" The master said nothing, but led him to a still pond. "Walk across," he instructed. The student stepped in, creating ripples with each footfall. The surface broke, shimmered, and settled. When he reached the other side, he turned back. "I see no trace of my steps." He said, "It's as if I was never here." The master nodded. "Exactly. But doesn't that make life meaningless?" "No," the master smiled. "It makes it free." Tetsu sat quietly, his fingers tracing the rim of his teacup. "All my life, I've wanted to leave something behind," he said, "to prove I existed." The monk looked at him, not with judgment, but with kindness. "And who told you that presence must be proven?" 3. Philosophical reflection. The illusion of legacy and the truth of presence. In our modern world, we are taught to leave a mark, build a legacy, create impact, be remembered. But Zen asks a deeper question. Can you live fully without needing to be remembered? The water does not record your name. The wind does not recall your words. And yet, they move with complete freedom. Freedom comes not from being immortalized, but from being present. When we cling to identity, to "I am this," or "I must be known as that," we carry a burden of shaping, controlling, performing. But in the still pond of true awareness, there is no need to perform. You are not the footprints, you are the water, and water does not need a witness to be holy. Psychological analysis. Ego, legacy, and the fear of dissolution. In psychology, the ego often clings to what is known as symbolic immortality, the desire to live on through achievements, children, ideas, or remembrance. This is natural, but it can also be a trap, especially when it becomes a defense against the reality of impermanence. We work ourselves to exhaustion not out of joy, but out of fear. Fear of being forgotten, fear of not mattering, fear of vanishing without applause. But peace arises when we let go of the need to matter, not because we don't have worth, but because worth was never conditional on recognition. Tetsu had begun to see this, that his carvings were not wrong, but incomplete. They held memory, but not freedom. And somewhere in that realization, he began to loosen his grip. Meditative closing. The beauty that leaves no trace at dawn Tetsu walked to the pond. He picked up a stone, once carved with his name, and skipped it across the surface. It danced. Once, twice, 3 times, then disappeared. The ripples widened, shimmered, and stilled. He stood there for a long time, smiling, and for the first time he felt not erased, but unburdened. Dear listener, what trace are you trying to leave behind? What name, title, proof are you carrying like a stone in your pocket? Let me offer this. You do not need to be remembered to be real. You do not need to be seen to be sacred. You do not need to leave footprints to have walked with love. As the Buddha once said, just as a flame does not leave its shape in the wind, so the wise pass through the world without attachment. Tonight, imagine a pond, still, clear, quiet. Now imagine yourself stepping in. No need to mark it, no need to disturb it, just be with it. And when you walk away, may you know you were there, fully, and that is enough. Story 11. The bell that rings only when touched by wind. In the still temple courtyard, a single bronze bell sways slightly in the afternoon breeze. A soft chime, like a memory made of sound, drifts outward. The opening. The one who waited too long. Tetsu was learning patience, though not willingly. He had planted a small pine in the temple garden. Each morning he watered it. Each afternoon he checked for growth. And each day it looked the same. Small, stubborn, unmoved. One day, after weeks of silence, he sat beside the monk, frustration tightening his voice. How does anything happen when nothing seems to happen? The monk stirred his tea and pointed to the old temple bell hanging from the rafters. Do you hear it now? Tetsu tilted his head. No, it's not ringing. Exactly, said the monk. It does not ring because we demand it. It waits. And when the right wind comes, it sings. The Zen parable. The silent bell. That evening, with a gentle fog rolling down the mountain, the monk told him a story. In a remote monastery, there was a bell said to hold divine sound. Monks would travel far to ring it, believing it would bring wisdom. But no matter how many pulled the rope, the bell made no sound. One day, a novice arrived. He bowed to the bell and sat in front of it without expectation. For hours, he did nothing, just breathed, just listened. As the sun began to set, a breeze stirred, not strong, but pure. It brushed the side of the bell, and it rang once, a clear, soft tone that filled the valley. The novice smiled and whispered, I was never waiting for the bell. The bell was waiting for me to stop waiting. Tetsu was quiet for a long time. Then he said, so many times I've tried to force things to happen. The monk nodded, and each time you were like the windless bell, full of sound but not ready to sing. 3. Philosophical reflection, the wisdom of timing. In Zen, effort is not abandoned, but it is tempered with attunement. There is a time to act, a time to wait, a time to be still so that life can find you. The bell teaches a paradox. It holds music. It is made for sound, but it does not ring when struck with urgency. Only when touched by wind, something unseen, uncontrollable and soft, does it fulfill its purpose. So too with transformation. You may meditate for years, pray for answers, beg for change, but true shifts come like the wind, on their own time, in their own way, and when they arrive, you will ring, not because you forced it, but because you were ready. Psychological analysis, surrender, readiness, and non-forcing modern therapy increasingly recognizes the concept of readiness in healing. Some wounds do not open because we are afraid. Some truths are not integrated because we are not yet safe. Some growth does not occur because the soil of our life is not yet soft enough. Trying to force revelation is like yelling at a seed to bloom. The nervous system opens when it is respected. Insight comes when space is made. Peace arrives not as a reward, but as a return. This mirrors non-striving, a central tenet of mindfulness practice. The idea that presence is not achieved by grasping, but by letting go. Tetsu had been pulling at every bell rope in his life. But now, he was learning to wait for the wind, to trust that the right tone, the inner shift, would come when he was quiet enough to receive it. Meditative closing. Listening for the wind days, later, the wind did come. It was soft, barely more than a breath. The bell swayed once, a shimmer of movement, and then, a sound so pure, so brief, so whole, it rang. Tetsu, sitting nearby, closed his eyes and smiled. He did not rush to understand it. He did not name it. He simply listened. And in that one note, he felt something open inside him. Not like a door pushed, but like a flower turned towards sun. Dear listener, what bells in your life have you tried to force? What truths have you demanded before their season? Let this be your reminder. You do not need to pull harder. You need to listen deeper, to be still, to soften, to allow. As the Buddha said, do not chase after the past. Do not seek the future. Abide in the present moment, where life rings. Tonight, sit with me in the silence. And if a breeze comes, in thought, in breath, in memory, let it touch the bell inside you. And if it does not come, that is okay too. The bell is patient, and so must you be. Story 12. The cup you cannot grasp. A quiet breeze moves through an open window. On the table, a porcelain teacup glows in the morning light. And somewhere, a question lingers, unanswered, like steam rising. The opening, what we reach, for Tetsu had begun to dream of peace. He imagined it like a perfect cup of tea, warm, full, smooth in the hand, a thing he could hold, something he could keep. Each time he felt stillness in meditation, even just for a moment, he tried to repeat it the next day, but it never came the same way twice. The more he reached for it, the further it seemed to drift, like a reflection in water, clear until touched. One morning he told the monk, "I want to feel what I felt yesterday." The monk poured tea into 2 cups, then held one out, just beyond Tetsu's reach. "Take it," he said. Tetsu reached, but the monk pulled it back just slightly. He reached again. The cup remained just out of grasp. Frustrated, Tetsu furrowed his brow. The monk said softly, "You see, when you chase what must be received, you spill what could have been." Sipped. 2. The Zen parable, the man who tried to catch the moon that night, with cicadas humming gently outside. The monk told a story. There once was a man who fell in love with the moon. Each night, he sat by the lake, watching it shimmer on the water's surface. One evening, he waded into the lake, arms outstretched, trying to catch it. No matter how deep, he went. The moon danced further away. Exhausted, he stumbled back to shore. A child nearby asked, "Why are you sad?" "I tried to hold the moon," the man replied. The child pointed upward. You were looking in the water. The moon was never down there. The man looked up and for the first time saw it clearly, full, untouched, and never meant to be caught. Tetsu closed his eyes. I've been chasing the reflection, he whispered. The monk smiled. Yes, and forgetting. That peace is not an object, but a presence. 3. Philosophical reflection, desire and the illusion of possession. Zen does not condemn desire, only our grasping of it. We long for things, love, success, stillness, clarity. But when we cling, when we insist that we must have, we begin to suffer. The cup you grasp too tightly will spill. The moment you try to hold forever will break. True peace comes not from owning experience, but from dwelling within it, even as it moves. To drink from the cup, you must open your hand. To feel the wind, you must stop chasing it. To receive, you must stop reaching. Tetsu's realization was not that peace was lost, but that it had always been there, waiting for him to stop chasing. Psychological analysis, attachment, control, and the nervous system in psychological terms, this is known as attachment anxiety, the fear of losing what we think we've found, the need to control outcomes to feel safe. It shows up in relationships, ambitions, even spiritual practice. We cling to moments of calm, trying to repeat them. We grip tightly to people or identities, fearing their loss. We define happiness as something we must secure. But the nervous system does not thrive in grasping. It relaxes in openness. Healing comes when we move from clenching to holding lightly, when we trust the present moment enough to stop manipulating it. This is the shift from control to connection. Tetsu's journey was not about banishing desire, but about seeing how desire becomes suffering only when it becomes demand. When he stopped needing the cup to be his, he finally tasted the tea. Meditative closing. The taste of letting go. Later that evening, the monk poured another cup, this time placing it softly into Tetsu's open palm. Tetsu did not clutch it. He bowed gently, held it with care, and took a slow sip. The tea was warm, not perfect, not the same as yesterday, but present, and that, he realized, was enough. Dear listener, what are you reaching for? A feeling you once had? A version of yourself you miss? A future you're desperate to control? Let your hands soften. Let your breath deepen. And hear this. You don't have to catch the moon. You only have to look up. As the Buddha said, attachment is the root of suffering. When you let go, you are free. Tonight, drink whatever this moment offers, without needing it to last or return or prove anything. The cup you cannot grasp is not a punishment. It is an invitation. So open your hand and let peace arrive, like tea poured into stillness. Story 13. When the tree drops its leaves. A gust moves gently through an orchard. Golden leaves spiral downward without resistance, and an old tree stands naked against a silver sky, unconcerned. The opening. The man who no longer knew his name. The traveler had once been a teacher, respected, needed, praised. His words had filled classrooms, his voice carried weight, and his days were framed by lesson plans and sharpened pencils. But now he was retired, the title gone, the schedules vanished, and with them, something else, his sense of meaning. He arrived at the temple with polite restraint and a folded letter in his bag, unopened. His steps were slow, not from age, but from uncertainty. I've Lost my purpose, he said quietly. The monk poured tea without speaking. They sat beneath a tree that was beginning to shed its leaves. One yellow, brittle leaf dropped between them. The monk gestured to it. Did the tree do something wrong? The man looked confused. No, it's just autumn. The monk nodded. Exactly. The Zen parable. The tree that refused to shed that. Evening. The monk told a story by firelight. In a quiet forest, a tall tree refused to drop its leaves when autumn came. I am nothing without them, it cried. They make me beautiful. They feed me. They show who I am. But the cold came anyway. The wind blew harder. The leaves clung until they grew dry, ragged, and began to fall on their own. Winter stripped the tree bare. For a time, the tree mourned. I am no one now, it whispered. But beneath the soil something stirred. The roots thickened, the trunk strengthened, and in spring the tree bloomed. New leaves. Not the same, not better, just right for the season. The traveller sat in silence, shoulders heavy with memories. My classroom, my students, they needed me. The monk looked toward the night sky. Perhaps they still do, he said. But perhaps what you gave was never yours to keep. 3. Philosophical reflection. You are not your roles. In Zen, the self is not fixed. There is no I to protect, only patterns, arising and dissolving like waves on the sea. We wear roles like garments, parent, teacher, leader, healer, but when we cling too tightly, we forget that the robe is not the monk, the leaf is not the tree, the title is not the soul. When a tree sheds, it is not dying, it is resting, it is preparing, it is honoring the rhythm of things. So too must we learn to lay down the name, the expectation, the mask, not in defeat, but in trust, that what we are beneath the roles is enough, that who we are without applause still matters. Psychological analysis, identity loss, ego death, and the renewal. Beneath in modern psychology, this moment is known as an identity crisis, often triggered by retirement, aging, transitions, or grief. The ego, once reinforced by routine and recognition, begins to crack. But this cracking is not a collapse. It is an opportunity, a threshold, a quiet returning. Therapists describe it as the death of the false self, the roles we played to survive, to succeed, to be seen. When those roles fall away, many feel exposed, empty, lost. But this is where transformation begins. Not by rushing to replace the old identity, but by sitting like a winter tree in stillness, letting the new grow from within, not from expectation. Tetsu watched the traveller over the next days. He did not teach, he did not speak much, but sometimes he would stand under the tree and simply breathe, and that perhaps was enough for now. Meditative closing. Becoming bare on. The 7th morning, the traveller walked into the temple garden. He held a leaf in his hand, not one he picked, but one that had drifted onto his path. He smiled, bowed to the monk, and placed it on the altar. I think I was afraid to be no one, he said. The monk returned the bow. And now, I'm learning that nothingness isn't emptiness, it's space. The monk placed a cup of tea into his hands. To hold, he said, what the next season brings. Dear listener, what identity are you clinging to? What leaf has already begun to fall from your hands? A role, a title, a version of yourself you once needed but no longer fits. Let this truth settle in your heart. You are not your leaves. You are not your last harvest. You are the tree, and the tree, when bare, is not dead. It is simply between songs. As the Buddha said, nothing is lost. Everything changes. Everything is nourished again. So tonight, breathe in and exhale what no longer serves. Let go of who you were, not in sadness, but in reverence. Because what comes next will bloom only when you make space. And the tree, when ready, never doubts the spring. Story 14. The garden that grows in silence. Morning light softens the dew. A woman kneels in the soil, hands deep in dark earth. Somewhere, a bird sings not to be heard, but because it must. 1. The opening. The woman who waited for colour arrived with quiet steps and a folded scarf that smelled of ash and rose petals. Her name was Hana. She did not speak of the grief that brought her, only that it was recent and deep, and shaped like someone who used to sleep beside her. The monk asked no questions. He gave her a corner of the garden, a patch of tired soil, a rake, a spade, a tin of seeds she didn't recognize. "There's nothing here," she said. The monk smiled. "That's why it's yours." And so she began. Each day she watered the ground, pulled weeds, sat in silence. Each day nothing bloomed. The Zen Parable. The garden that was never rushed one afternoon. As the clouds gathered like slow thoughts, the monk came and sat beside her. She sighed. "I think the soil is dead." He nodded toward the trees. "Do they hurry?" She shook her head. "Do you think they question the rain, demand the sun?" "No." The monk leaned back against a stone. "There was once a man who planted a single lotus seed. He checked it every hour, dug it up to see if it had begun. He cursed the soil, blamed the clouds. Finally, exhausted, he stopped visiting. Months later, when he returned, the pond was still. And there it was. A blossom, soft as breath, opening only because he had let it be. Hana looked down at her hands. They say time heals. The monk looked gently into her eyes. "Time doesn't heal," he said. "Space does." Philosophical reflection. Healing without forcing. Zen understands that the heart is like a garden. We can tend it, water it, be present with it, but we cannot command it to bloom. Healing is not an achievement. It is not a project. It is not a checklist to complete before spring. It is a rhythm, sometimes visible, sometimes not. We mistake stillness for stagnation, but under the surface, life moves, roots thicken, seeds tremble. Cells remember how to divide. The mind cannot always perceive it, but the soul knows when to grow, and it never grows on demand, only in the presence of quiet care. Psychological analysis, grief, growth, and the therapeutic role of slowness. In psychology, grief often resists analysis. It is not a problem to solve. It is a process to survive. Healing does not respond well to urgency. Modern culture praises speed, productivity, moving on, but trauma, loss, emotional rupture, these ask something else: slowness. Slowness allows integration. Slowness allows repatterning. Slowness allows feeling without flooding. In therapy, this is often called titration, healing in small doses, just enough to stay present, never more than we can hold. Hannah's garden reflected this wisdom. Nothing visible for weeks. No reward, no validation, just hands in soil, just breath, just waiting without needing. And from that waiting, something subtle began to rise. Meditative closing, the bloom that needed. No witness. One morning, without fanfare, Hannah arrived early. The fog was still low. She knelt beside her corner of the garden, and there it was, a single bloom. Not large, not bright, but alive. She didn't cry, she didn't call for anyone. She just sat with it, heart steady, breath deep. Later, the monk passed by and saw her smile. He didn't ask what had changed. He only whispered, "It has begun." Dear listener, what part of you is still buried? What wound are you trying to heal too quickly? Let me say this with kindness. You don't have to rush. You don't have to bloom today. You don't have to be okay by anyone else's season. Just keep watering, keep breathing, keep showing up with gentle hands. As the Buddha said, do not dwell in the past. Do not dream of the future. Concentrate the mind on the present moment. And this moment may be quiet. But beneath it, something living stirs. Something that will one day rise. Not because you forced it, but because you waited and did not look away. Story 15. One breath, one bow. A wooden floor creaks beneath folded knees. Incense curls through morning air. And somewhere, in the hush before a bell, a monk bows, not to be seen, but to be whole. The opening. The novice who wanted. To arrive it had been months since Tetsu arrived at the temple. But still, he asked the question. When will I understand? The old monk, as always, did not rush to answer. He finished sweeping, set down the broom, and pointed to the hall. Come, he said, inside a line of cushions. A single candle, the faint scent of cedar. Breathe, the monk said. Bow. Tetsu obeyed. He inhaled. He bowed. Then looked up. And now? He asked. Again. They repeated this. Breath, bow, over and over. 10 times, 20, 50. By the end, Tetsu's knees ached, his forehead damp. I don't get it, he muttered. The monk smiled faintly. That, he said, is the lesson. The Zen parable, the 1,000 bows. That evening, the monk told an old story beneath the low lantern glow. A young seeker once asked a master how to reach enlightenment. The master gave no answer, only instructed him to bow. The seeker bowed once, then again, then asked, "Is this working?" The master said nothing. So the seeker bowed 100 times. Still no answer. Angry, exhausted, he shouted, "What am I supposed to feel?" The master bowed once and smiled. The seeker watched, and suddenly, in the silence, something shifted. Not in the air, not in the room, but inside him. A surrender, a presence, a breath not wrapped in demand. Tetsu looked down at his hands. I thought awakening would feel like lightning, he said. The monk reached out and poured him tea. Sometimes, he replied, it feels like making tea for the 1,000th time, without resentment, without expectation. 3. Philosophical reflection. The sacred within the simple Zen reveres simplicity, not because it is easy, but because it is honest. In the modern world, we chase extraordinary experiences, visions, breakthroughs, fireworks in the mind. But true practice is often quiet, repetitive, ordinary, bowing, breathing, walking, sweeping, one breath, one bow, not to reach something, not to impress anyone, but to become what we already are. Each act becomes a form of prayer when we give it our whole attention. Each repetition becomes sacred when we stop demanding variety. The novice wants answers. The master, instead, offers rhythm. Because the path is not a ladder, it is a circle, returning again and again to presence. Psychological analysis, neural repetition and the power of ritual in. Neuroscience, repetition creates neural pathways, habits, not only of action, but of being. Each Botetsu performed trained his nervous system to soften. Each breath re-regulated his emotional field. Each act of mindful repetition rewired his perception of purpose. Modern therapy supports this. Daily rituals, when done with presence, reduce anxiety, increase emotional regulation, and foster meaning. The magic is not in variety, it is in the depth of a repeated act done with full awareness. Tetsu's frustration came from the mind's hunger for novelty, but his peace grew, slowly, silently, through bowing without asking for a reward, through breathing without asking for change, through showing up again and again. Meditative closing. The practice is the point. That night, before sleep, Tetsu bowed once more. He didn't try to feel anything special. He didn't chase insight. He just bowed, head to floor, breath soft, eyes closed, and in that small motion, something in him settled, not like an answer, but like a home. Dear listener, how many times have you asked, when will I finally arrive? How often have you repeated something, hoping for a result? Let this be your reminder. The practice is the path. The repetition is the transformation. As the Buddha said, little by little, a person becomes good, as a pot is filled, drop by drop. So tonight, breathe, then bow, in whatever way you can. Fold the laundry, wash the cup, touch your heart, not because it leads somewhere, but because in that moment you have already arrived. One breath, one bow, one life, unfolding. Story 16. The wind has no destination. A breeze moves across a quiet field, not to arrive, not to conquer, just to pass through, and in its movement, everything stirs without resistance. The opening, the traveller. Without a map, the boy had walked for many days. Dust coated his sleeves, his sandals were worn, his satchel held only a wrinkled map and an apple bruised by time. He came to the temple, not because he was seeking the Dharma, but because he was lost. I had a plan, he said, dropping to the stone step outside the monk's hut. A destination, a purpose. But now, I don't know. The monk looked up from a small paper fan he was mending. And what is it you're looking for? The boy hesitated. The path. I need to know where to go next. The monk gestured to the wind brushing through the tall grass. Do you think it knows, too? The Zen parable. The wind and the riverbank. That night, with clouds drifting slow and pale across the moon, the monk shared a story. There was once a breeze that wanted to find the end of the earth. Where should I blow? It asked the mountain. Follow the river, said the mountain. So it did, but the river meandered, turning back, vanishing into valleys. The breeze grew impatient. Where does this go? It demanded. The river replied, I don't know. I only follow the shape of the land. Furious, the breeze left, striking out in all directions, desperate to reach somewhere, until one day it passed over a small hill and heard laughter. Child sat beneath a tree feeling the breeze on his face. "Where are you going?" the child asked. The breeze paused and realized it had touched the world but never needed a destination. The boy said nothing, but his eyes softened, and for the first time he noticed how cool the wind felt on his skin. Philosophical reflection. Direction without attachment. Zen is not against direction, but it warns us of fixation. The mind wants maps, milestones, a straight line from here to there. But life is more like a river, curving, looping, disappearing underground, reappearing elsewhere. And sometimes, like the wind, we are moved not to arrive, but to experience. Purpose is not a point on a map. It is the quality of movement, the presence in motion. When we obsess over destinations, we miss the field we walk through, the face we pass, the wind itself. To live fully is not to know exactly where we are going, but to feel the air on our face and move anyway. Psychological analysis, letting go of life scripts. In modern psychology, many struggle with what is called a failed life script. We build expectations. By age 30, I'll marry, I'll succeed, I'll be there. But then things change, plans fall apart, the future vanishes, and with it, a sense of self. This rupture can lead to depression, identity crisis, despair, but it can also become an opening. Therapists call it narrative reauthoring, the act of letting go of the old story and choosing presence over performance. The wind, after all, has no timeline. It moves where it is moved, and still, it touches everything. The boy in the temple did not, yet know where to go next. But that night, for the first time, he slept without clenching the map in his hand, and that was a beginning. Meditative closing. Let the wind move you. The next morning, the boy stood by the gate. He turned to the monk and bowed. "I still don't know where I'm going." The monk bowed in return. "Then you are free." The wind stirred the trees. The boy smiled and walked on, not with certainty, but with trust. Dear listener, what destination have you been clinging to? What old map has grown heavy in your hands? Let this be a moment to breathe, to let go, to trust that your life may not move in straight lines, but it moves with meaning, even if you can't name it yet. As the Buddha said, do not seek for the path in faraway lands. The path exists beneath your feet. So tonight, close your eyes. Feel the wind of this moment. It doesn't need to take you anywhere. It only needs to touch you. And in that touch, you are home. Story 17. The thread of the robe. A soft wind lifts the edge of a robe drying in the sun. Threads of many colors, frayed and mended, ripple in harmony. Beneath it, the whisper of all the hands that once sewed. The opening. The robe that did not match Tetsu had been given a new robe. Not new in the way one imagines, not fresh from loom or tailor, but new to him. It was a patchwork robe, sewn from pieces of many others, some faded, some vibrant, some clearly from robes worn by monks long gone. He accepted it with gratitude, but in the privacy of the small hut, he hesitated. It doesn't match, he murmured, holding it up. It looks like many lives sewn into one. The monk appeared behind him, carrying a small bowl of dye. Exactly, he said. That's why it's perfect. Tetsu looked again and saw what he hadn't before. Every stitch was careful, every tear had been mended. This was not a robe of leftovers. It was a robe of survivors. The Zen parable, the seamstress and the robe of sorrows. That evening, as rain began to fall softly against the paper doors, the monk told him a story. In a poor village there lived a seamstress who never turned away the grieving. Widows, orphans, survivors of war, those who had lost homes or names. She asked each to bring a scrap of cloth from their past, a piece of their sorrow, a symbol of what they could not keep. With these, she began to sew a robe, not to hide their grief, but to carry it together. When it was finished, the robe was not beautiful in the ordinary sense. It was misshapen, multicolored, uneven. But when worn, it calmed the heart, because it whispered, "You are not the only one who has suffered, and you do not carry your sorrow alone." Tetsu sat quietly. The robe in his lap now felt heavier, not with shame, but with meaning. Philosophical reflection. The beauty of shared imperfection. In Zen, the robe, known as kesa, is not just clothing. It is a symbol of renunciation, yes, but also of belonging. Each piece tells a story. Each thread, a quiet vow. The robe reminds us that we are stitched from many lives, ancestors, strangers, teachings, wounds. Nothing in us is entirely ours, and still we are whole. Modern culture glorifies the seamless, the curated, the polished, but Zen honors the visible repair, the patch, the scar, because only what has broken and been lovingly mended knows tenderness. To wear the robe is to say, I am not perfect, I am not untouched, but I am here, sewn together by time and made stronger by connection. Psychological analysis, collective healing and the power of belonging. In trauma psychology, there is a growing understanding that healing cannot happen in isolation. While introspection is essential, so is attunement. The nervous system's need to feel seen, held, mirrored. We are relational beings. Many wounds are relational: betrayal, abandonment, violence. And so healing must also be relational, through co-regulation, shared stories, and community presence. The robe of many threads becomes a metaphor for this. No single patch tells the whole story, but together they create something greater than survival. Tetsu realized, as he traced the seams, that his pain was not unique, and in that realization he found relief. Not because his sorrow disappeared, but because it was no longer alone. Meditative closing. Wearing what was given. The next morning, Tetsu walked to the garden wearing the robe. A young novice looked up and said, "Your robe is different." Tetsu smiled gently. "Yes," he replied. "It carries many names." The novice tilted his head. "Does that bother you?" Tetsu looked at the threads, some still loose, some nearly invisible from time. "No," he said. "It comforts me." The wind stirred, the robe fluttered like a flag of peace, and in that moment, Tetsu felt, not clean, not perfect, but belonging. Dear listener, what threads have shaped your robe? What sorrows do you carry that you believe are yours alone? Let me tell you gently, you are not alone. You never were. Your story may be yours, but its echo lives in others. In Zen, we do not erase the past. We stitch it into something sacred. As the Buddha said, this body is not mine. It is made of elements, of ancestors, of stars, of all beings. Tonight, Picture your life as a robe, patched, imperfect, worn, but stitched with care, by hands seen and unseen. Wear it, not with pride, not with shame, but with the quiet strength of one who has walked, and still walks, among many, together. Story 18. The candle that burns itself to light others. A flame flickers in a quiet room. Its light softens the shadows, even as its wax surrenders to heat. Nearby, an old monk watches, not in urgency, but in awe. The opening. The one who gave too much, she was known in the village for her kindness. The woman named Mai brought food to the sick, sat at the bedside of the dying, listened when no one else had time to listen. Her hands were always full, carrying warmth, balm, answers. But now, they trembled. She arrived at the temple pale and hollow, her smile stretched thin. "I don't know what's wrong," she said to the monk. "I've always helped others, but now I wake up tired, as if something has left me." The monk handed her a candle. "Light it," he said. She did. "Now hold it in your palm." She looked at him, startled. "But I'll get burned," the monk nodded gently. "Exactly." 2. The Zen parable, the candle and the empty room. That evening, the monk told a story as Mai sat beside the fire, her eyes dim but open. In a small mountain hut, a candle sat on a windowsill. Each night, it was lit to guide travelers through the dark. The flame danced, warm and sure, even in wind. It gave its light freely, asking nothing. But one night, it burned low, its wax nearly gone. The wind outside howled, and a traveller passed. But the candle flickered and died. The traveller stumbled in the dark and did not reach the door. In the morning, the candle whispered to the sun, "I tried." The sun replied, "Even light must rest. A burnt wick cannot guide anyone." Mai lowered her gaze. "I thought to serve was to give everything." The monk stirred the coals. "To serve well," he said, "you must first keep your flame." 3. Philosophical reflection. Compassion with boundaries. Zen values compassion, karuna, as one of the highest practices, but even compassion must be wise. To give without measure, without rest, without self-awareness, is not service. It becomes self-erasure. The candle's gift is its light, but to burn it recklessly, without tending, is to turn giving into martyrdom. True compassion includes oneself. In fact, without self-care, all care becomes unsustainable. Zen does not ask us to dim our light, but to protect the flame so that it may last longer, glow warmer, reach further, to sit, to breathe, to rest. These are not luxuries. They are maintenance. They are mercy. Turned inward. Psychological analysis. Compassion. Fatigue and the necessity of boundaries. In psychology, this state is called compassion fatigue. A quiet depletion common among caregivers, therapists, teachers, and anyone who gives more than they receive. It's a cousin to burnout, but deeper. It affects the soul, the sense of meaning. Symptoms include numbness, exhaustion, irritability, and shame, the very opposite of what the giver wishes to embody. Mai was not failing, she was depleted, and the first act of healing was not doing more. It was stopping, allowing the nervous system to reset, rebuilding emotional reserves, practicing self-empathy. Boundaries, then, are not walls, they are borders of compassion. They say, "I want to help you, and I must also keep myself whole." 5. Meditative closing. tending the flame. The next morning, the monk lit a candle and placed it beside Mai. He placed another beside it, then another. One flame became many. He said, "When your own light burns steady, others will find you, and you won't have to burn yourself hollow to be useful." Mai closed her eyes. She did not know how long the journey back to herself would take, but for the first time, she saw the value not in giving more, but in resting where she had given. Enough, dear listener. Have you given too much lately? Not just time or effort, but yourself. Let me remind you gently, you matter as much as those you love. Your rest is not selfish. Your pause is not failure. Your needs are not a burden. As the Buddha said, you yourself, as much as anybody in the entire universe, deserve your love and affection. Tonight, close your eyes. Picture your inner flame, not to judge its brightness, but to feel its warmth. Tend it, guard it. Let it flicker gently in the quiet. And remember, even a small flame, kept alive, can light many nights. Story 19. No path but the step. A foot presses gently against damp earth, a soft crunch of gravel, and in the silence between steps, the world appears, not as a destination, but as a companion. The opening. The seeker who looked. Too far ahead, he had been walking for days, maybe weeks. The traveller's name was Sho. His sandals were worn, his pack light, and his eyes constantly scanning the horizon. He had a list of questions, folded in his pocket, creased from many rereads. He arrived at the temple with urgency in his breath. "I need to find the right path," he told the monk. "Not just any path, the right one." The monk nodded thoughtfully and pointed to a winding trail behind the garden. "Then walk," he said, "but leave your questions behind." Sho looked alarmed. "What if I get lost?" The monk smiled, gently. "Then take another step." True. The Zen parable. The man who refused to walk. That evening, beneath a sky inked in indigo, the monk told a story by the soft light of a candle. A man once stood at the crossroads of a forest. He studied every path, measured angles, calculated distances, but he never took a single step. Years passed. Weeds grew around his feet. Moss claimed his walking stick. A boy passed and asked, "Why don't you move?" The man replied, "Because I haven't chosen the perfect path." The boy bowed and whispered, "The perfect path is the one you walk." Then he stepped forward and disappeared into the trees. The man remained, still waiting, long after the forest forgot his name. Sho stared into the flame, his fingers twitching. "All this time I thought I needed clarity before I moved." The monk stirred the coals. "But sometimes," he said, "clarity waits on the other side of the next step." Philosophical reflection. Presence as direction. In Zen, the path is not linear. There is no final summit, no singular enlightenment, event, no map that leads from lost to arrived. There is only this step, and then the next. The mind seeks certainty. The heart seeks meaning. But the body knows. Walking itself is the way. The present moment is not the bridge. It is the destination. To walk without knowing is not foolishness. It is trust. It is the surrender of needing to be right in favor of being true. Sho had believed the path must be revealed first, then walked. But now he sensed, walking is what reveals the path. Psychological analysis, paralysis, and embodied wisdom in psychology. This struggle is often called analysis paralysis, the tendency to overthink decisions to the point of inaction. It is born from fear, fear of failure, fear of regret, fear of choosing wrong and not being able to return. But while the intellect spins, the body waits, aching to move, to trust, to act. Mindfulness practices often redirect us from mental loops into embodied awareness, feeling the ground beneath our feet, listening to the breath, letting the hands move with intention. These are not distractions from insight. They are pathways to it. Sho began to understand this not through words, but through motion. Each step he took quieted the noise, not because the questions were answered, but because they no longer held him hostage. Meditative closing. The step that is the path. The next morning, Sho rose before the bell. He did not carry his folded list. He did not ask for permission. He simply walked. The garden path, the river's edge, the wooded trail beyond the temple gate. Each step became its own purpose, each breath its own teacher. He smiled to himself, not because he knew where he was going, but because for the first time, he didn't need to know. Dear listener, how long have you waited to begin? How often have you paused trying to decide the best way forward and forgotten to move at all? Let this be your reminder. There is no perfect path. There is only this moment. And in this moment, there is one step, not 10, not the whole journey, just one. As the Buddha said, the journey of 1,000 miles begins beneath your feet. So tonight, return to the breath. Place one hand on your chest and feel the step you do not see, but are always taking. A step into now. A step into life. A step that is already enough. Story 20. The gate that opens inward. A wooden gate creaks faintly in the breeze. Moss gathers along its base, yet it remains closed, not locked, only waiting. Not for a key, but for the right kind of attention. The opening, the wanderer at the wrong door. She had visited many temples, crossed wide rivers, climbed cold mountains, prayed at shrines lined with gold and chants and incense thick enough to blur the edges of her memory. Still, she felt distant. I've been searching for years, she said to the monk. Peace, awakening, home. But every gate I've come to feels like the wrong one. The monk was tending a quiet corner of the garden, pruning bonsai, trimming gently with worn shears. He glanced up and smiled. Perhaps the gate you seek, he said, doesn't open out. She blinked. Then where? He turned back to the tree. In. 2. The Zen parable. The gate with no locks. That evening, the wind picked up, scattering dry leaves across the temple floor. The woman sat beside the monk as he told her a story. Pilgrim once traveled the world to find the doorway to truth. At every temple, he asked, "Where is the gate?" Some showed him arches made of stone. Others pointed to ceremonial doors. Still, he felt no different when he passed through them. One day, exhausted, he sat beneath a tree and wept. A passing monk paused and said, "Why do you cry?" "Because no gate has opened for me," the pilgrim replied. The monk smiled and tapped the man's chest. "You've passed through hundreds of gates, but the one that matters opens inward." The woman sat still for a long time. Then she touched her heart. "I've knocked on so many doors," she whispered, "and never thought to enter the one I carry." Philosophical reflection. The inward turn Zen teaches that the ultimate temple is not built of wood or stone, It lives in stillness, in awareness, in the breath between seeking and arriving. So many wander the world looking for refuge, when what they long for is not a place, but a state. The inward gate is quiet, unmarked. It doesn't respond to force. It opens with attention, not effort. 2. Walk through it is not to leave the world, but to enter it more fully, with fewer filters, with clearer eyes, with a heart that no longer asks, "Where must I go?" but instead, "What in me am I willing to meet?" Psychological analysis, inner refuge and the safety of the self in therapy. Much work is spent helping individuals return to themselves, especially after trauma, burnout, or years of external striving. We learn to chase approval, to live in performance, to seek safety in others, in outcomes, in certainty. But healing comes when we build what clinicians call inner refuge, a felt sense of self that can hold all emotion without collapse. It's the capacity to sit in discomfort and remain, to feel fear and stay, to feel grief and breathe, to feel joy and not reach for more. The gate inward is the nervous system softening, the mind ungripping, the spirit remembering, "I am already home." The woman, once a seeker of temples, began to sit beneath a tree each day, not to pray, not to hope, but to listen. Meditative closing, the door that was always open. One morning, the woman did not ask a question. She did not seek instruction. She simply closed her eyes, and as the wind moved gently across her face, she felt something shift, not outside her, but inside. Not a revelation, not an answer, but a doorway, quiet, waiting, and she walked through. Dear listener, how long have you searched? Through books, through teachers, through far-off plans and one-day dreams? What if what you seek is already here? Not out there, not someday, but now, within. As the Buddha said, be a lamp unto yourself. Be your own refuge. Do not seek it outside. Tonight, close your eyes. Place your hand over your heart. Breathe and listen. There is a gate inside you. It has no name. It has no lock, and it opens. The moment you stop asking the world to save you, walk through, welcome home. Story 21. The flower that does not bloom in spring. A hillside awash in blossoms. Bees humming in the warmth. And in one quiet corner of the garden, a single bud remains closed, unhurried, untouched, unashamed. The opening. The ones who waited too long. They had tried for years, a husband and wife, weathered by hope. They had planted, prayed, consulted doctors and monks alike. Every spring, they lit incense and placed a white flower on the altar, the one they longed to grow in their own life. But year after year, no child came. They arrived at the temple one late spring afternoon, hand in hand, not to ask any more, only to sit. There was a peace in surrender, however bittersweet. "We've stopped expecting," the woman whispered. The monk knelt beside a pot in the corner. Inside, soil, dry and bare. He smiled. "Some flowers do not bloom in spring." The man looked puzzled. "But isn't that when all things bloom?" The monk pressed one finger into the dirt. "Not all," he said. "Some take a different sun, a longer sleep, a deeper silence." The Zen parable, the blossom of the 10th month that evening, as fireflies stitched light into the dusk, the monk told a story. In a temple garden, a gardener planted dozens of spring flowers. By April, the garden glowed: cherry, plum, magnolia. But one small plant remained barren, its leaves curled inward, its stem thin. The other monks whispered, "It must be dead." But the gardener refused to uproot it. He watered it daily. When summer came and the heat was thick, it still did not bloom. Autumn arrived, and then, one crisp morning in the 10th lunar month, a single white flower opened. The others were gone, but this one bloomed alone and lasted longer than them all. The woman held her breath. The man blinked slowly, the story nestling into his silence. "So, the flower wasn't late," he said. "No," the monk replied. "It was right on time." Philosophical reflection, trusting the rhythm of becoming. In Zen, time is not measured by calendars or clocks. It is measured by readiness. The seed does not bloom because the season insists. It blooms because something in it has ripened. Our lives, too, carry their own sacred rhythm. But we forget, we compare, we rush, we panic when our spring doesn't look like another's. Yet the truth remains. Some things require more darkness, more stillness, a longer gestation, and this does not make them lesser. It makes them deeper. The white flower, when it came, was no more precious than the cherry blossom, but it was truer to itself. Psychological analysis, comparison, patience, and emotional maturity. Modern life conditions us to compare timelines. We measure ourselves by the success of others, their children, careers, health, relationships, and when ours bloom later, or not at all, we feel shame. But psychological wellness depends on internal alignment, not external pace. Therapists often guide clients back to their own seasons of readiness, reconnecting to inner cues, not outer deadlines. Emotional maturity is not rushing healing, achievement, or family. It's trusting what is real in the now. The couple at the temple began to understand this, not as resignation, but as reverence. They had not failed to bloom. They were still in the soil, and that too was sacred. Meditative closing. When it's time, it will open. One morning, the woman rose early. She walked alone to the temple garden, the sun not yet, cresting the hill. There, in the corner, a single bud had opened on the monk's potted plant. Small, pale, fragrant. She said nothing, but her hands, which had held so much tension for so long, unclenched just a little. Dear listener, what part of you is still waiting to bloom? A dream, a healing, a new chapter. Let this be your reminder. You are not behind. You are not broken. You are not late. You are becoming. In the time that is yours. In the rhythm only your soul knows. As the Buddha said, like a lotus born in muddy water, even when unseen, it is growing. Tonight, place your hand over your heart. Feel the soil of your being. There is a flower there, not yet open. But one day, when the sun is right, it will. And it will not apologize for its timing. Story 22. Sweeping ashes after the fire. The scent of charred wood still lingers. Morning light falls across blackened beams. And in silence, someone begins to sweep, not to erase, but to honor. The opening, the temple that burned. It happened overnight. No storm, no lightning, just a crackle, a flicker. And by morning, the small meditation hall had been reduced to its frame. charcoal columns, scorched earth. A bell half melted. No one was hurt, but something sacred was gone. The villagers gathered in stillness, unsure what to say. Tetsu arrived with a broom, not to cry, not to pray, but to sweep. He moved slowly, carefully, each stroke of the straw brush deliberate, not to erase the fire's memory, but to make space. The others watched. Why sweep what's already lost? One asked. Tetsu paused, looked up. To make room for what may grow, he said. The Zen parable. The monk and the burned shrine. That evening, sitting beside the smouldering remnants, the old monk told a story. Not loud, but steady, like breath through grief. A revered shrine once stood atop a hill, carved in cedar, painted in red. One night, it burned. No cause, no warning. The villagers wept. Some wanted to rebuild it exactly as before. Others said to leave the ground bare, out of respect. But one monk knelt at the edge with a straw broom and began to sweep the ashes into neat, reverent piles. When asked why, he replied, I do not sweep to forget, I sweep to begin. Months later, a small tree sprouted where the altar had been. The shrine was never rebuilt, but those who came still bowed, not to what was gone, but to what remained. Tetsu said nothing, only kept sweeping long after the sun dipped behind the hills. 3. Philosophical reflection. Starting over is a sacred. Act Zen does not deny loss. It does not dress wounds in false hope. It sits with the ashes. But then, when the time is right, it begins again. Not in denial, not in haste, but with reverence. To start over is not to dishonor the past. It is to honor it enough to not stay trapped within it. Fire destroys, but it also clears. It reduces to what is essential. And from that bareness, something new, something simpler, may arise. Tetsu's broom was not a symbol of erasure. It was a gesture of readiness, a prayer made with hands instead of words. Psychological analysis, post-traumatic growth and meaning. Reconstruction. In psychology, loss is often followed by disorientation. We ask, who am I now without this job, this home, this person, this certainty? Healing requires what therapists call meaning reconstruction, the slow, painful work of finding new significance in a changed world. It doesn't mean forgetting. It means sweeping carefully through the ashes, seeing what still shines, seeing what is too charred to keep, and then choosing, with trembling courage, to begin again. Post-traumatic growth is not the opposite of grief. It is the offspring of it, a quiet bloom that emerges not despite suffering, but through it. Tetsu was not sweeping to move on. He was sweeping to return, to the center of what could still live. Meditative closing, making space for what remains. Days passed. No plans were drawn, no blueprints made, but people began to bring stones, flowers, a small bell, not to rebuild the old hall, but to create a space, open to sky, ringed by fire-scorched beams, softened by silence. And each morning, Tetsu swept the space with the same care, not as a chore, but as a form of prayer. Dear listener, what has burned in your life? A dream? A relationship? A place you thought would last? Let this be your permission. Not to forget, but to begin again. Gently, in your own time, with reverence for the ashes. As the Buddha said, each morning we are born again. What we do today is what matters most. Tonight Close your eyes. Imagine yourself with a broom, made not of judgment, but of grace, and sweep, not to erase, but to make room for whatever tender thing may root itself in this clearing, for whatever quiet life may grow from what once was flame. Story 23. The pond that reflects only when still. A stone drops gently into still water. Ripples spread and fade. And when the surface settles, the sky returns, not because it changed, but because we stopped stirring it. The opening. The boy with the storm. Inside, he was young, not more than 13, and his fists were always clenched. He didn't speak much when he first arrived at the temple. His eyes darted like birds trapped in a room. When others spoke, he stared at the floor. When silence came, his jaw locked. The monk observed without comment. Then one day, after a morning filled with muttered curses and slammed doors, the boy threw a rock into the pond. It splashed hard, then disappeared. The water churned and clouded. "Why? Does it always feel like this?" he snapped. "Like I can't think, like everything inside me is chaos." The monk waited a long time before answering. Then he said, "Come back here tomorrow, at sunrise, and watch." 2. The Zen parable, the water that could not see itself. At dawn, the boy stood beside the pond, shivering in the cool air. The monk appeared without a word and handed him a small flat stone. "Throw it," he said. The boy tossed it gently this time. They watched as ripples spread. The reflection of the trees shattered. The sky, once mirrored, broke into waves. "Now wait," said the monk. They sat together as the pond slowly stilled. Minutes passed, and then the reflection returned, clear, undistorted. A traveller once asked a master, "Why can I never see myself clearly?" The master led him to a pond. "Look now," he said, but the water was stirred by wind. "I can't," said the traveller. "It's blurry." The master replied, "Then stop moving and wait." The boy was silent. For the first time, he didn't ask anything. He just watched the pond and let it become still again. Philosophical reflection. Seeing ourselves through stillness. Zen does not suppress emotion, but it does teach us that clarity comes through stillness, not force. When we are agitated, angry, fearful, or overwhelmed, the mind becomes like stirred water, muddy, shifting, fragmented. We act. We react. We say what we don't mean, chase what we don't need, defend what isn't real. But when we pause, when we breathe, sit, soften, the inner surface calms, and in that calm the truth returns, not as words but as reflection. This is not control. It is not repression. It is the practice of becoming a pond again. So we can see, so we can choose, so we can heal. Psychological analysis, emotional regulation and mindful pausing in neuroscience. This mirrors the process of self-regulation. When we are triggered or distressed, the amygdala, the brain's threat center, floods the system. Thinking narrows. Fight, flight, or freeze responses activate. But with mindfulness, grounding techniques, and conscious breathing, the parasympathetic system re-engages. The water calms. Therapists teach practices like naming the feeling without judgment, pausing before responding, returning to breath and body. These are not tricks. They are ancient, embodied, proven. The pond stills, the reflection returns, and in that reflection, the boy began to glimpse not a monster, not a storm, but himself. Just a boy, hurt, needing space. Meditative closing. The surface is not the depth. That evening, the boy returned alone. He stood by the water and didn't throw anything. He just watched the sky reflected in the still pond. And for a brief moment, in the silence, he smiled. Dear listener, what waters in you are stirred? Anger, restlessness, confusion that won't settle. Do not demand clarity in the middle of the storm. Wait. Breathe. Soften. The pond of your mind is capable of stillness, not by force, but by kindness. As the Buddha said, just as a mirror reflects clearly when polished, the mind reflects truth when calm. Tonight, become a pond. Let your thoughts ripple. Let them fall away. And in the stillness that remains, may you see not perfection, but truth, and may that be enough. Story 24. The Guesthouse of the Mind. A door creaks open at dawn. Footsteps cross the threshold. And inside, a space once empty fills with voices. Some familiar, some unwelcome, all waiting to be seen. The opening. The room she tried to keep clean. She was tidy, not just in her home, but in her heart. Feelings were things to be managed, arranged, kept in their boxes. Sadness, best hidden behind soft smiles. Anger, not in front of guests. Fear, tucked into corners with the dust. When she came to the temple, it was with a simple question. Why won't I feel peace, even though I've removed everything that disturbs me? The monk served tea, but instead of placing the cup before her, he set it at an empty spot beside her. She looked puzzled. But there's no one there. He smiled gently. There will be. The Zen parable, the house with no locks. That evening, beneath a sky lit with thin stars, the monk told a story. There was once a woman who kept her mind like a house, windows clean, rugs swept, shelves in perfect order. One day, a knock came. Who is it? She asked. Grief, came the reply. She tried to ignore it, but grief entered anyway, quiet and barefoot. It sat in her favorite chair. Then came anger, then jealousy, then loneliness. They tracked mud, rearranged the furniture. The woman wept. Why are you all here? A soft voice answered from the kitchen. Because this house is yours, and we are your guests. In time, she served them tea, and one by one, they bowed and left. The woman blinked slowly. So the goal isn't to keep them out. No, the monk replied. It's to greet them kindly when they come. 3. Philosophical reflection. Welcoming. All that arises, Zen does not aim to banish emotion. It teaches us to make space for it, without indulgence, without resistance. Your mind is a guest house. Each thought, each feeling, a visitor. Some arrive with gifts, others come with dirt on their shoes, but none are permanent. What creates suffering is not their presence. It is the refusal to open the door. When we cling to joy and exile sorrow, we divide the soul. But to bow to each guest, even the painful ones, is to remain whole. It is to say, this too belongs. Psychological analysis, emotional integration, and acceptance. In modern therapy, especially within acceptance and commitment therapy, ACT, there is a core principle. Feelings are not the enemy, resistance is. Suppressed emotion does not disappear. It hides, hardened. It erupts in illness, tension, or sudden collapse. But when we turn toward what hurts, gently, curiously, the nervous system shifts. Integration begins. Naming an emotion without judgment reduces its power. Welcoming it, as one welcomes a guest, invites peace. This is not the same as wallowing. It is coexisting. It is being the house that does not panic when the wind knocks at the door. The woman at the temple began to sit with her feelings, not as enemies, but as visitors. And in doing so, she stopped needing the house to stay clean. She let it be alive. Meditative closing. Tea for the unexpected. One morning, she brewed tea as usual. As the kettle sang, she noticed the familiar tightness in her. Chest anxiety, perhaps. She didn't reach for distraction. She poured a second cup and said aloud, "I see you. Sit with me a while." The feeling didn't vanish, but it softened. And in its company she felt, not broken, not invaded, but whole. Dear listener, what feeling has knocked at your door lately? Sadness, frustration, a heaviness with no name. You do not have to force it out. You do not have to invite it to stay forever. You only need to say, "Welcome. You are here. I will not run." As the poet Rumi once echoed, and Zen affirms in silence, this being human is a guest house. Every morning a new arrival. Treat each one honorably. He may be clearing you out for some new delight. Tonight, let the house of your heart be open, lit by one candle, 2 cups of tea, and enough space for whatever guest appears. Story 25. The moon that cannot be held. A full moon rises over still water. Its reflection glows quietly, and a hand reaches out, not to grasp, but to bow. The opening. The one who wanted to understand everything. He was the last to arrive. Younger than the others, but older in his eyes. The kind of tired born not from labor, but from thinking too much. He read all the sutras, asked endless questions, filled notebooks with diagrams of awakening. "I just want to know the truth," he said to the monk. "Do you?" "Yes." The monk pointed to the moon rising above the hills. "Then stop trying to hold it." The man blinked. "What do you mean?" "Try," the monk said. "Reach out." The man raised his hand. "Now bring it to your chest," said the monk. His hand returned. Empty, of course. The moon remained. "See?" The monk smiled. "You can't hold it, but you can sit in its light." The Zen Parable. The Master and the Moonlight. That evening, the wind was still and the sky clear. Stars scattered across black silk. The monk sat beside the young man and told him this. A student asked his teacher, "How do I hold on to enlightenment?" The master took him to the river at night. "Look," he said, pointing to the moon's reflection on the water. "I see it. Now scoop it up." The student cupped water in his hands. The reflection shimmered, then disappeared. "Try again." The student grew frantic, splashing, searching. Finally, exhausted, he sat down. The master smiled. "You cannot carry the moon in your hands, but you can sit still and let it shine on your face." The young man was quiet. He closed his notebook and, for the first time, looked directly at the moon. Philosophical reflection, the truth that cannot be owned. In Zen, truth is not a possession. It is not a prize. It is not a thing we carry from temple to temple like a treasure in a box. Truth, Dharma, is an experience. It is the moment when the mind stops clenching, the moment when we no longer demand the mystery to explain itself. The moon does not need your grasp to shine. It needs your stillness. To know something, in the Zen sense, is not to dissect it. It is to become one with it, to drop the separation between the knower and the known, and in that dissolving, to finally see. Psychological analysis, surrendering control, embracing mystery. The Western mind often seeks mastery, understanding as security, knowledge as control. But many emotional and spiritual truths are non-linear, non-verbal, and irreducible. The mind wants to solve life like a puzzle, but the soul longs to live it like a poem. Therapists working with grief, trauma, and existential doubt often speak of tolerance for ambiguity, the capacity to hold what is unresolved. This isn't passivity, it is maturity. It is what Rilke meant when he wrote, "Be patient toward all that is unsolved in your heart. Live the questions now." The young man, after years of seeking answers, began to find peace in not having one. And that, paradoxically, was the answer. Meditative closing. The moon is not yours to hold. The next night, the young man returned to the same hill. He brought nothing. No pen, no paper, no plan, only presence. He sat beneath the moon, said no words, closed his eyes, and let the silver light fall across his brow. It changed nothing, and it changed everything. Dear listener, what? Have you tried to hold that was never yours? A person, a belief, a perfect version of yourself? Let this be your closing reminder. You were never meant to grasp the moon. You were meant to feel its light, to bow in its presence, to breathe beneath its silence. As the Buddha said, you only lose what you cling to. So tonight, let go. Let go of needing to understand all things. Let go of needing the path to be clear. Let go of the moon in your hands and look up. It is still there, unheld, unharmed, unconditionally radiant, just like you. Thank you for journeying with us. If you've listened this far, you've allowed yourself to slow down, to breathe, to sit with silence, with sorrow, with wonder. That alone is a rare and beautiful act in today's world. These 25 stories were not created to teach you what to think, but to offer a mirror, a still pond, where your own truth might gently appear. If even one of these stories helped you soften, if even one breath landed deeper than before, then this journey was worth it. We would love to hear from you. What story stayed with you? What line opened something in you? How did this experience speak to your season of life? Please take a moment to share your reflections in the comments. Your words may be the next light on someone else's path. If this series brought you peace, insight, or comfort, we invite you to like this video to help others find it. Subscribe to The Empty Boat for more quiet storytelling and soul-centered content. Share this with someone who may need it, a friend, a loved one, or even yourself, again, on another night, because some stories are meant to return. And remember, you are not alone on this river. You are not broken. You are simply becoming. And you are welcome always in this floating temple of stillness. From all of us here at The Empty Boat, thank you for being part of the journey. We'll see you again in the next breath, in the next story, in the next letting go.